NASA is postponing the launch of its next crewed mission to the International Space Station amid ongoing issues with the Boeing Starliner.
What actually happened to the Boeing Starliner in 2024 left many people shocked. Instead of a successful mission, the spacecraft faced serious problems, leaving 2 astronauts stranded in space. The failure wasn't just about a broken ship, but pointed to bigger issues within NASA and the spaceflight industry. What caused such a major setback for this highly anticipated mission? We will explore the real story behind the Starliner's downfall that changed NASA for good. Boeing's fall from glory. Let's dive deep into Boeing Story, the big aerospace company. Nowadays, we can easily look back and spot all the troubles and heated debates surrounding Boeing. Yet when NASA chose Boeing as the key player for advancing human space exploration, it seemed like they were making a sensible choice. Up until that point, Boeing had made a name for itself as a trustworthy innovator. They had crafted the initial booster for NASA's pioneering moon mission, which involved the Saturn V rocket, and they also built the lunar rover that astronauts used on the moon. Moreover, Boeing's team was deeply involved in assembling the Space Shuttle orbiters, and led the construction of the American segments of the International Space Station. They didn't stop there. They also developed the Delta IV rocket and have a long history of crafting both military and civilian aircraft. But behind Boeing's impressive legacy, a hidden flaw began to emerge, one that would soon lead to the Starliner disaster. Stay with us as we uncover the truth later. With such a robust track record, it was no wonder NASA decided to rely on Boeing. However, there was a significant moment that, looking back, marked a shift in Boeing's trajectory. In 1997, Boeing embarked on a huge business move by acquiring McDonnell Douglas, another aircraft manufacturer, for $14 billion, a staggering amount at that time. But this deal seemed to cost more than just money. It appeared to take away the very spirit of the old Boeing. Before this merger, Boeing was celebrated as a place where engineers were in charge, safety came first, and making money was a secondary concern. After the merger, however, the culture from McDonnell Douglas, which put shareholders first and engineers second, started to infiltrate Boeing. It was commonly said that McDonnell Douglas effectively bought Boeing with Boeing's own money. The decline didn't happen overnight, but it became increasingly clear as time went on. Now let's shift our focus to the spacecraft involved. The Boeing Starliner, a partly reusable crew capsule and service module, was Boeing's brainchild, started back in 2010. The initial funds came from NASA's Commercial Crew Initiative, which was looking for a successor to the aging Space Shuttle fleet. Designed for full automation, the Starliner also has manual controls for the mission pilot to use if needed. This spacecraft is packed with tech, sporting 52 thrusters on its service module, 28 for handling its orientation, 20 for moving it around in orbit, and 4 RS-88 rocket engines ready for emergency situations. These thrusters are neatly grouped into 4 clusters on the service module, with additional ones fitted on the crew capsule for re-entry purposes. Let's not forget the astronauts, the real heroes here. Barry Butch Wilmore and Sunita Suni Williams are among NASA's finest. Suni has been a fan favorite for a long time, spending 322 days in space over her 2 missions, with more than 50 hours spent walking in space. Her background is impressive. She was a Navy diver and flew combat helicopters before she joined NASA. Butch is no less impressive with 2 space missions to his name, one of which was piloting the Space Shuttle Atlantis back in 2009. Both are veterans of the Navy and truly represent the best of the best in astronauts, making them ideal candidates for the first manned mission of the Starliner, despite the vehicle's known challenges. Boeing first got its funding boost from NASA back in 2010, a sum of $18 million as part of NASA's Commercial Crew Development Program. This program aimed to turn the concept of the Starliner into a working prototype. Boeing was optimistic, predicting that the Starliner would be up and running by 2015, provided the funds kept coming. The next year, NASA granted Boeing access to the orbiter processing facility at Kennedy Space Center to manufacture and test the Starliner. Over the subsequent 3 years, NASA poured more money into the project, providing $92 million, $460 million, and $10 million at different stages. Boeing had big plans, but unexpected problems were about to get in the way. Clock error crashes Starliner. Everything seemed to be going according to plan for Boeing's executives. They had secured a high-profile contract with NASA, which came with a steady flow of government cash, and they were pushing hard to get an exclusive contract, which would mean not having to split the budget with any other companies. Their idea was that Boeing needed all the allocated budget to make sure the Starliner was a success. However, William H. Gerstenmaier, the guy at NASA responsible for human exploration, thought it was smarter to have a bit of competition. He managed to convince NASA to support both Boeing and SpaceX in the Commercial Crew Program. In 2014, NASA handed out $4.2 billion to Boeing and $2.6 billion to SpaceX to develop their respective crew vehicles. To clinch the full deal, each company had to hit several milestones, which included an uncrewed orbital flight test and 6 manned missions to the International Space Station, ISS. Despite all the plans, the Starliner wasn't ready by 2015, and its test flight without a crew got pushed back several times. Meanwhile, Boeing was used to operating on a cost-plus funding model, which meant they would just bill the government for whatever they spent and add a fee on top. But now, dealing with a fixed-price contract was a whole new game. Every dollar they spent was either cutting into their profits or adding to their losses. The influence of the McDonnell-Douglas-era leaders, who preferred to cut costs, began to erode everything. Starliner was a solid idea that just never got the chance it deserved to shine. In December 2019, the Boeing Starliner blasted off on top of an Atlas V rocket, aiming for the stars. But almost right after it got into orbit, things went sideways, literally. Out of all possible technical snags, a simple clock error was the culprit. When the Starliner tried to sync up with the mission timeline, it was off by 11 hours. Instead of firing its thrusters to adjust its orbit to match up with the International Space Station, it just drifted aimlessly, wasting precious fuel. By the time it tried to get on the right track, it had used up too much fuel, leaving it unable to safely dock with the ISS. It was actually pretty lucky that the Starliner's first flight got delayed because, just a couple of hours before they planned to bring the spacecraft back to Earth, the folks at Boeing found a big problem in the software. This glitch could have made the thrusters work all wrong. Normally, the crew capsule is supposed to separate smoothly from the service module, but with this bug, the two parts might have smashed together. That could have led to a huge explosion or sent them spinning wildly into the atmosphere where they'd likely burn up. NASA ended up calling this first attempt a really close call that everyone noticed. But despite the scare, the capsule did make it back to Earth safely. Once it was back, astronaut Suni Williams decided to name it Calypso after the character in Homer's Odyssey, who kept Odysseus from going home. She also meant it as a shout-out to a style of Caribbean music where singers make up the lyrics as they go, kind of a funny nod to how unpredictable the Starliner's trip had been. Even though the main issues on that first test flight were about the software and not the actual spaceship parts, it didn't mean there weren't other big problems. Back in 2018, during a test of the engines meant to help the spacecraft escape in an emergency, something went wrong, and half of the propellant valves didn't close. This left 4,000 pounds of a really dangerous fuel called hydrazine leaking out. When it caught fire, it created a massive fireball that destroyed a lot of the test equipment. This wasn't all on Boeing, though, because the engines were made by another company called Aerojet Rocketdyne, which is pretty well known in the space business. Still, these are not the kinds of problems you want in a spacecraft that's supposed to carry people on important missions. With each problem, Boeing faced more pressure, and their struggles were far from over. Starliner's fuel valve fiasco. Fast forward to 2021, and after spending 2 years fixing the software, Boeing had the Starliner ready to try another launch. But then, new problems popped up. 13 of the fuel valves got stuck, stopping the spacecraft from being able to launch. They tried to fix it right there on the launch pad, but nothing worked, so they had to send the whole thing back to the factory. Later, they figured out that moisture had gotten in and caused the valves to corrode and freeze up. Boeing blamed Aerojet Rocketdyne for giving them faulty parts, but Aerojet fired back, blaming Boeing for bad communication and not paying their bills. It was a big mess that really didn't look good for either of the space giants. NASA had picked 4 astronauts, Bob Behnken, Eric Boe, Doug Hurley, and Suni Williams, to work closely with the engineering teams at both Boeing and SpaceX. Doug Hurley noticed a big difference in how the two companies worked. The team at SpaceX was really open to hearing what the astronauts had to say. They liked working together, and they really listened to any suggestions. Boeing's team, on the other hand, didn't seem to care as much. They came off as a bit too sure of themselves and not really open to input. Hurley even found out that they hadn't told the astronauts about a fuel leak that had happened before. After that, he told NASA he wouldn't go on a flight in the Starliner, which only made people worry more about it. Jump to May of 2022, and there was an uncrewed Starliner sitting on the launch pad again. The Atlas V rocket did its part perfectly, but once the spacecraft was in orbit, 2 of its thrusters didn't work right. Luckily, the other thrusters managed to handle the situation, but there were more issues when it tried to dock with the International Space Station. The pressure in the combustion chamber dropped, causing even more thrusters to fail. Somehow, Starliner still managed to dock with the ISS, but it was clear things were far from perfect. Then, in May of 2024, Starliner was back on the launch pad, ready for another try, this time with astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams. Their first launch attempt had to be called off because of a problem with an oxygen valve in the Atlas V rocket. This delay turned out to be a good thing, though, because it gave them time to find a leak in Starliner's helium system that would have caused even more delays. Nearly a month later, on June 1st, Butch and Suni were ready for another shot, but a glitch in the computer stopped them again. Finally, on June 5th, they were all set for one last attempt. Once they got into orbit, their main job was to test out Starliner's system for moving around in space. But after they tried using the RCS thrusters a bunch of times, 5 of them ended up not working. To make things worse, the spacecraft's helium system started leaking again. Helium is really important for making sure the fuel system works right because it's light and doesn't react with other stuff, which is great for space. But just like the helium in balloons at a party starts to leak out after a while, the helium in Starliner was doing the same thing. You know, having 1 or 2 thrusters go out isn't usually too bad, but when 5 of them stop working, that's a real problem. What made it even worse was that all the broken thrusters were at the back of the spacecraft. Originally, the design had 2 thrusters at the rear in each cluster, adding up to 8 in total. Now, more than half were out of action. That left Starliner just hanging there, out of reach from the ISS, for about an hour, while everyone waited to see if they could go ahead with only 5 thrusters working. There was no safe way to move forward, and turning around wasn't looking good either. If there was ever a time when Butch and Suni felt truly stuck, that was probably it. Luckily, the engineers back on Earth managed to get 4 of those broken thrusters working again. That was enough for Starliner to make a successful docking with the ISS, and everything seemed to be okay for the moment, at least as far as test flights go. At first, the delays seemed like just minor bumps because of a schedule clash with a spacewalk on the ISS and a few extra days needed for more tests. Even after all these issues, Boeing still wasn't in the clear, and the hardest challenge was just ahead. Starliner's thrusters fail again. Even after going over all the data from the flight, the engineers couldn't figure out why the thrusters messed up on the approach and then suddenly worked right for the docking. All they knew was that at some point, the thrusters started giving less power than they were supposed to, which made the computer freak out and shut them down. Looking for more answers, they had Butch and Suni go back into the Starliner to test fire 7 of the 8 thrusters at the rear to check how they were working. This gave them more clues, but they still couldn't pin down exactly what went wrong. So Boeing and NASA decided to keep Starliner up there a bit longer while they set up a new test system on the ground. They took the same kind of thruster from the Starliner and ran it through some test fires, hoping to recreate the problem they saw in space. This testing was going to take a few weeks, which meant Butch and Suni wouldn't be heading home until at least the end of July. This situation led people to wonder if astronauts were left hanging on the International Space Station, ISS, though many saw this as a possibility from the start. There were plenty of supplies and food ready for the 2 extra crew members up there, so they had lots of work to keep them occupied. Butch and Suni kept themselves busy with all sorts of tasks, from fixing the toilets in space to doing brand new science experiments, and even chatting live with people on Earth to let everyone know they were okay. Boeing was facing a couple of big challenges that made it hard to get them back. The problems were all in the Starliner's service module, which is the part that burns up when it comes back into the Earth's atmosphere. That meant once it was gone, they couldn't really tell what went wrong. And since they still weren't sure what the issue was, they couldn't confidently say the Starliner could safely make its way back through the atmosphere. Even with these unknowns, Boeing kept saying their spacecraft was all right and that they could bring Butch and Suni home if they had to, but they decided to hold off and gather more details. In August, they figured out things weren't as smooth as hoped. It turned out that a Teflon seal in the thruster's oxygen valve was getting too hot and swelling up during busy times, like when Butch did the shakedown maneuvers as they were getting close to the ISS. When the seal got too big, it blocked the flow of oxidizer that helps burn the fuel, which meant less thrust, and eventually the system had to shut down. While Boeing could tell what set off the trouble, they were still scratching their heads about why it happened in the first place. This kind of problem hadn't shown up on 2 earlier Starliner trips, and even after Butch and Suni did another test firing of the thrusters while still docked at the ISS, they couldn't make it fail again. So what they knew was that they really didn't know what might happen next. When it was time for Starliner to leave the ISS and start its trip back to Earth, the thrusters could work just fine, or they could mess up like before, or maybe something even worse could happen. NASA had to make a tough call when they found out about this. They decided that Butch and Suni wouldn't be on Starliner for the trip back. Sending a spaceship back empty isn't a small thing. It messes up a lot of plans. Butch and Suni still needed a way back to Earth, and space rides aren't exactly roomy. To get them home, they had to change who was flying on the next SpaceX Crew Dragon, which usually takes 4 people. So Crew 8 would fly with 2 seats empty, and Crew 9 would still go up with just 2 people, meaning Butch and Suni wouldn't get back to Earth until February 2025. Is the Boeing Starliner's failure just an unfortunate accident? Or is there a deeper issue with NASA's entire space program? Let us know what you think, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.